Shavua Tov, everyone. So today's daf in Masechet Menachot is Memchet, I believe. I hope I always get nervous. I have the wrong daf. 48, and much to Nava's chagrin, it got a little complicated again. So we're back in this complicated, complex, and challenging Gemaras, but they say it builds character, right? So the discussion yesterday, which we're going to continue today, two lines from the bottom of
Like
Menzayin.
I could suggest beef jerky, but this is a much better box scenario.
James,
Yeah.
you're not muted. That's you're there. So the question that we're discussing, the main thing is that there were kivsei atzeret, right? So on Shavuot, there was special kvasim that were brought as a shlamim. It's the only shlamim ever brought by a tzibor, by a community, and they were a keves. A keves means a sheep or whatever animal in its first year is what we call a keves, as opposed to an ayal, which is a 2-year-old sheep. And they were brought with 2 loaves of bread, right? So 2 loaves of bread were brought with them. And we had a whole Mishnah yesterday. We had a Breita yesterday and a Mishnah before that about what happens if you do it for the wrong intention or lo shma or all those questions. Says the Gemara today, 2 lines from the bottom. What if you found another creative way to do it wrong, which is Tanur Rabbanan, shachat shnei kvasim al arba chalot. Instead of preparing 2 chalot, you prepare 4 chalot. And that's wrong, right? You're supposed to have two. So you shecht your 2 kvasim with 4 loaves of bread as a designated loaves. And then, of course, they say to you, that's not the right number. You're supposed to have two. So says the Braita, Moshech shtayim mehem u'minifam. Take 2 of them. It doesn't really mean take 2 of them, but designate 2 of them and wave them with the keves so that those 2 will be the ones that are designated for the keves, and they'll be the ones that you eat as the shtei alechem. And the other 2, vashar nechalot v'pidyon. The other 2 are not kachim of a korban, but they're kachei bedek habayit, right? They're a gift to the Beit HaMikdash. You can redeem them. You can go pay the Beit HaMikdash $50 for the 2 loaves of bread, and then use them as loaves of bread, like any other kachim. So you basically designate 2 of them for the karban, and the other 2 are redeemed for kachim. Now the problem is that you don't know which 2, right? Because all 4 were there when you shechted the karban. So you have to assume it could be any 2 for the karban and any 2 for the kachim. Any 2 for bedek habayit that you have to redeem, and 2 that are part of the karban. And the question is, how do you redeem them? So it says the Gemara on top of Memchet Amud Aleph. Amru Rabbanan k'meder of Chisda. They said this in front of Rav Chisda, and they said, "Ha lo ki Rebbe, this is not going like Rebbe." Remember, Rebbe said that the shchita, that slaughtering of the kvasim, makes the bread kodesh. In which case, Ike Rebbe, second line, I Rebbe, kivan da amar shchita mikatsha. Since Rebbe said that the shchita itself made 2 of the loaves kodesh, and we don't know which 2. So you got 4 loaves of bread, 2 are kodesh as part of the karban, and the kohanim just eat them. 2 have to be redeemed. But how could you redeem them if 2 of them are kodesh? The parak lohecha. Where do you take them to redeem them? Meaning physically, where do you put these loaves of bread? Eat the parak lomeavroi. If you take them outside the Beit HaMikdash into the Ezrat Nashim or the Har HaBayit, and you then redeem them, that's a problem because the shtei alechem that are part of the karban are not allowed to go outside, right? Kivan dechtiv lifnei Hashem if solahu biyotze. Because the karban has to be eaten and done in front of Hashem, it has to stay in the Beit HaMikdash. You can't take the 2 loaves that are part of the karban outside the Beit HaMikdash. And of course, you don't know which 2, right? That's the problem. Gavai, now let's say you leave them all inside the Beit HaMikdash, and you say, well, we're going to do it here. And the Kohanim basically eat all 4 loaves. They pay $50 to redeem 2 of them, and the other 2 they're allowed to eat because it's a karban. The problem with that is Hama'ayil Chulin La'azara. You're not supposed to bring chulin on purpose into the azara, and basically you're turning 2 of these loaves into chulin. So how do you resolve that problem? Amar the Rav Chisda says Rav Chisda, well, the truth is it's not as big a deal as you think, because the olam karebi, it could go according to Rebbe. Now remember, the other opinion in the Mishnah in the Braita was that the loaves don't become kodesh until you do zrika, right? Until you sprinkle the blood. In which case, the fact that you did shechita on 4 loaves doesn't make any of them kodesh. You could just say, well, I'm going to do zrika for 2 of them, and the other 2 are completely bedek habayit, and you just take them outside and redeem them, right? But says Rav Chisda, no, la'olam, you could go according to Rebbe that they became kodesh with the shechita. Uparak lugava, you can redeem them inside the Beit HaMikdash. What about the problem that you're bringing chulin into the Azara? Chulin memela kahavin. You're actually not bringing chulin into the Azara. You're creating chulin in the Azara, right? Meaning you didn't bring them in when they were chulin. When you brought them in, they were still hektish. You redeemed them and they became chulin. But that's not the problem. You're not allowed to bring chulin into the Azara, but you can turn something potentially into chulin in the Azara, and therefore it's not a problem. So that was how he resolved that problem. Asked Ravina to Rav Ashi, Emily Ravina to Rav Ashi, like 8 lines from the top. That's a very nice explanation, but there's another Breita about the same question, which explicitly says, take it outside and redeem it. Hatanya Kishu Podin, in Podin Ela B'chutz. That when you take the loaves out and redeem them, you take them outside the Beit HaMikdash, which according to Rebbe is impossible. Because according to Rebbe, two of them are Kodesh already with the Shechita. You don't know which two. You can't take them outside. Answers Rav Ashi, you're right. Havadi Rebbe Lazar Rebbe Shimoni. This clearly, that second Breita, which says take it outside and redeem it, has to be going according to Rebbe Lazar Rebbe Shimon. Because according to Rebbe, you're not allowed to take them outside. The Rebbe, ha'ifsul b'yotze. According to Rebbe, you can never take them outside. So that is remember these details because we're going to look at the opposite in a minute. But this is the first sort of level of this. If you shech two kvasim, which is the goal, on 4 loaves of bread, which is inappropriate, even according to Rebbe, that the shechita makes them kodesh, it only makes 2 of them kodesh kedushat haguf, like a karban. We just don't know which 2 of the 4, and therefore you have to redeem the other 2 and pay hektish, and you can then eat the kohen, could then eat all 4 of them, the kohanim. Now says the Gemara, the next case, which we'll see how it's connected in a second. Amarle Rav Acha Brei Derava le Rav Ashi. It says Rav Acha Brei Derava le Rav Ashi. This question, again, I'm just saying many times, and this is confusing. Nava, stop me if it's too confusing. But you shechted 2 kvasim, which is the right number on Atzeret, with 4 loaves of bread, which is double the right number, right? So we said according to everybody, it works. The question is, do you take it outside to redeem it or redeem it inside? But says the Gemara, that seems to go against Rabbi Yochanan, right? And Rabbi Yochanan's an Amora, he's not supposed to argue with this Breita. Said Rav Acha, Brei Rava, Rav Ashi, Leimet Avit Yufta to Rabbi Yochanan, Meha, right? What is Rabbi Yochanan? Because Rabbi Yochanan had a comment about a very similar case for a different karban, which is a karban toda. Right? The karban toda is a karban that you bring 40 loaves of bread with. Says Rabbi Yochanan, or says the Amoraim, toda sheshachta al shmonim chalot. Let's say you double it up. You're so excited about your toda, you bring 80 loaves of bread, which again is the equivalent of Shnei Kivsei Atzeret bringing 4 loaves of bread, right? Just double. So there, Chizkiah says, well, 40 of them are Kodesh. Kachu arba'im mitoch shmonim. And Rabbi Yochanan says, lo kitchu arba'im mitoch shmonim. None of them are Kodesh because you did it wrong. You're supposed to do 40 loaves. 80 loaves is not the mitzvah. Too bad, right? You messed it up. So right now we had a machloket about 2 kvasim on atzeret and 4 loaves, and everybody agrees they're kodesh. That seems to go against Rabbi Yochanan. Answers the Gemara, lav mi itmarla. Didn't we comment on this statement of Rabbi Yochanan? Amar Reb Zera, hakol modim. Everybody, including Rabbi Yochanan, admit teicha da'amar liktishu arba'im mitoch shmonim dekacha. Right? If you come in with 80 loaves of bread and you say, I haven't decided yet which ones I want to be Kodesh, but 40 of them should be Kodesh, you don't have to know when you shech the animal which ones it will be, right? The question, and the question in Rabbi Yochanan's case was where you said, I want all 80 to be Kodesh. And that's what Rabbi Yochanan said, it's none, right? You either do it right or you get nothing. But hachanami, in this case of Shavuot, damar liktishu tarti mitoch arba'a. The cases where you shechted the Shnei Kivsei Atzeret and said, I have 4 loaves of bread, 2 of them should become Kodesh. The only problem is you didn't say which 2. So according to Rebbe, the Shechita made 2 of them Kodesh. You just don't know which ones. According to Rebbe Shimon, the Shechita doesn't do anything. You have to wait till the Zrika, in which case you don't have a problem until you do Zrika. If you did Zrika for all 4, you'd be in trouble also. So that's how we understand that question. So that's we'll call that stage 1. You did double the loaves on the right number of kvasim. Then the Gemara says, what about the opposite? What's the opposite case? Where you do double the kvasim for the same number of loaves. So instead of bringing Shnei Kivsei Atzeret, you walk in with 4 kvasim on Atzeret, right? I'm not exactly sure what you were thinking, right? But you walk into Beit HaMikdash with 4 kvasim and 2 loaves of bread, and you shecht 4 kvasim, right? So now this is a big problem, right? Because on Shavuot, there's a mitzvah to do Shnei Kivsei Atzeret, 2 kvasim. So 2 of them are great. Karban, eat them, burn them, do the right thing. But the other 2 were obviously done incorrectly, right? And the thing is that the Gemara is going to say, I'll speak it out a little bit because it's very complicated. The Gemara points out that you can solve the problem now of what to do with the shnei kfas, the extra two kfasim. Remember, you have four lambs, right? I think kfasim are lambs, right? You have four, we'll call them lambs, sheep, whatever they are, some animal. Four kfasim, right? Two of them are appropriate for the kivsei atzeret. What are the other two appropriate for? You could do anything. You could bring any karban with kfasim. You could bring an ola. You could bring a shlamim. You could bring an asham. But you can't bring kivsei atzeret because there's only two kivsei atzeret. So the Gemara says, I have a great solution for you. What can you do? You can do the zrika of the karban shelo lishma, right? Do the zrika of two of them for the wrong person or for the wrong mitzvah, or say, I'm doing these for my grandmother or whatever. In which case, they become remember the halacha of a shlamim that's done shelo lishma is that it's kosher. It just doesn't count for the balim l'shem chova, right? But the balim, of course, doesn't need the two extra kvasim because they already have two, right? So I have a great solution. Take two of the kvasim, do zrika for kivsei atzeret, and take the other two and do zrika for someone's birthday party or whatever, and then they'll just be regular shlamim, right? So that's a great solution. The problem with that solution is that you have to do something inappropriate. And so the question of the Gemara is, can you do something inappropriate in order to salvage the karban? So that is, and we're going to discuss this for a bit. It's a very, very deep question, and there's many applications. So says the Gemara now, Tani Rabbi Chanina Tirata. He was sort of, from Tirat, I guess. I don't know where exactly Tirata is, but it sounds like it's somewhere. Kamei Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Chanina Tirata said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Shachat arba'a kvasim al shtei chalot. You did shchita, you already slaughtered them. Four kvasim for chalot. Someone shows up and says, what are you guys doing? And they're like, we thought we could do extra. I don't know, whatever they were thinking. But it's Shavuot, they have four dead kvasim, but they're just slaughtered and their blood is in a cup. Says the Tana, I guess, Rabbi Chanina said in front of Rabbi Yochanan, Moshech shnayim mehem, what you should do is you should take aside two of the karbanot, two of the lambs, vizorek daman shelo lishman, and do zrika for the wrong person, right? So remember, the real person that you're supposed to do the zrika of the kivsei atzeret is for Klal Yisrael, it's for the whole nation. So do it for somebody else, or do it for the wrong reason, let's say, and then they become no longer kivsei atzeret, they become a regular shlamim, and then the other two will be kivsei atzeret. Shem iyata omer kach, because if you don't do it that way, hifsadata achronim, then you're going to have to throw them away. Because I'll do the simpler pshat in Rashi. Rashi's complicated pshat here, but the simpler pshat is if you do all four for kivsei atzeret, two of them were done inappropriately, and you'll have to throw them away. So in this case, you can salvage all the animals. You can eat all of them. Two because they're kivsei atzeret, and two because they're done shelo lishman, and they're shlamim. So that's what Rabbi Chanina Tirata said in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Amar lo Rabbi Yochanan, said Rabbi Yochanan, I have a big problem with this fundamentally. Can you tell a person get up and do a sin or do something wrong, right? Which is specifically put something on the mizbeach with the wrong thoughts in order that you could then therefore keep the meat and eat it? You're not allowed to do that. And how can I prove to you can't do that? Atnan, we had a Mishnah, if you recall, Masechet Zvachim, which talked about a case where you took the limbs of a chatat and the limbs of an ola. Remember that the meat of a chatat is eaten by the kohanim. The meat of an ola is burned on the mizbeach, right? You shech two animals. Now they're male and female, but somehow you couldn't tell the difference, right? And you have a bunch of meat, and you don't know if it's an ola or a chatat, or they're mixed together. So says the Mishnah. This was a Mishnah we had in Zvachim. Evorei chatat shenitarvu be'evorei ola. If the pieces of a chatat become mixed with the pieces of an ola, so Rabbi Eliezer says, no big deal. Yitznu lemala, you can put it all on the mizbeach. You're not allowed to take a chatat to put it on the mizbeach. You're supposed to eat it, right? You're wasting it. Says Rabbi Eliezer, not a big deal, because you can view it as being fuel. Roa ani et besar chatat lemala kilo hi eitzim. You're basically just treating the basar chatat not like meat. You're treating it like what happens after meat. It's organic material. It just burns. You can basically say, I'm not treating it like a chatat. I'm just burning it. And that's not a problem of bizayon or ruining a chatat. And the chachamim say that's ridiculous. Of course you can't do that. It's a chatat. You're not allowed to burn it. So what you have to do is to ubar tsuratan v'yatzula beit hasrifa. You have to let it change its shape, which always means you let it stay overnight. Right? And then once you let it stay overnight, it's possible with lina, because carbon can't stay overnight. And then you're supposed to burn it. So take all of the pieces of the ola, the pieces of the chatat, which you can't differentiate, let them sit overnight, and then burn them. Says more, why? Amai, why does the Rabbanan say you have to burn it? Lema, why don't you say, so this is Rabbi Yochanan's question. Lema say, Amod v'chete b'shvil shetiskeh. Get up and do something inappropriate, meaning burn a karban chatat on the mizbeach, which is wrong, so that you can burn the ola. So at least you could fulfill the mitzvah of burning the ola. So if, according to your rationale, you're supposed to do something wrong in order to achieve at least something out of it. Says that was Rabbi Yochanan's question to Rabbi Chanina. Said Rabbi Chanina, there's a big difference. Because here by the Shnei Kfasim, or the four Kfasim that you brought, you're doing something wrong with two of them by being Zrika Shalol Lishman, so that you can salvage the other two. But by the Ola and the Chatat, you can't do something wrong for a Chatat in order to salvage an Ola. It's a different carbon. So you have to be in its own thing. So let's read that inside. Amod v'chateh b'chatat b'shvil shetiskeh b'chatat amrina. You say you can go and do something inappropriate in a karban chatat to salvage the karban chatat. But amod v'chateh b'chatat b'shvil shetiskeh b'ola lo amrina. You don't cross-reference. You don't say, do something wrong with the karban chatat in order to salvage the karban ola. So therefore, there's a difference, says Rabbi Chanina, between my case and the Mishnah. My case, you're doing something wrong with the kfasim of Atzeret to salvage the other kfasim of Atzeret. And in your case, you're proposing, which the rabbis say you can't do something wrong with the chatat in order to salvage the ola. That's not allowed. So that's the difference, according to me.
So just to go back, tiras is Persia.
Very topical. Okay.
That's what I'm.
Thank you for sharing, Miriam. Says the Gemara now, 14 or so lines from the bottom, but is that really true? Ubechada milta mi amar, is it true that you're allowed to do something wrong if it's going to help salvage something about the same issue? V'hatanya, but we have another Braita which says the following, okay? Kivsei atzeret sheshachtan shelo lishman. Let's say you get your two kfasim of the atzeret and you shech them for the wrong person, right? So that's a problem, right? Because remember, we said by a shlamim, if you shechted shelo lishman, it counts, and you can bring it on the mizbeach, and you can eat it, but it doesn't count for the baalim l'shem chova, right? But that's one problem. Or let's say sheshachtan bein lifnei zmana bein lacher zmana. Let's say you shechted it before Shavuot, that's how we think it means here, or after Shavuot, right? You missed the day, or you got too excited. And Lag BaOmer, you pulled aside the kfasim that are set aside for atzeret, and you shechted them. Says the Braita, Hadam Yizarik, you can sprinkle the blood, right? Because basically it's not going to count for Shavuot, but it's a shlamim, right? V'habasar yochal, and you're allowed to eat the meat like any other shlamim. However, now this is our question from the next words. Im haita Shabbat. Now let's say it's Shabbat when you did this, right? You made a big mistake. You shechted this animal on Shabbat. Let's say Shalol Lishma, right? Because it's Shavuot, it's Shabbat. So remember, the karbanot of Shavuot are Docha Shabbat, right? So on if Shavuot falls out on Shabbat, like it does not in our calendar, I don't think, but in theory it could happen, right? We have our second day of Shavuot to Shabbat this year, but I don't think that would count. But let's say Shavuot falls out on Shabbat. So you're supposed to do all the karbanot of the day. You're supposed to come to the Beit HaMikdash, shech the kvasim, sprinkle them on the mizbeach. You need to burn them on Shabbat. You wait till night to burn them, right? And you eat it at night. But let's say it's Shabbat and you shechted it shalol lishman. So now it's no longer going to count for your kivsei atzeret. It's a regular shlamim. But you're not allowed to do a regular shlamim on Shabbat, right? So says the Braita, im haita Shabbat lo yizrok. You're not supposed to do zrikat hadam, because you're not allowed to do that on Shabbat, and it's a regular shlamim. However, v'im zarak hurtza. Now, if you did do zrika, it works, right? You're not over. Lehaktir emurim le'erev. But you should then burn the parts at night, because you shouldn't burn the parts on Shabbat. You should wait till Shabbat's over, and then you burn the part of the karban. Says the Gemara, why can't you sprinkle the blood on Shabbat, right? Because you're not allowed to sprinkle blood on Shabbat for a karban that's not appropriate. But if you don't sprinkle the blood on Shabbat, and you leave it till the night, the blood will become puzzle with shkiyat chama, and then you're going to have to throw away the karban. But if you sprinkled it on Shabbat, you can burn it at night and eat the meat at night. So why don't you say, Amai, Lema, 8 lines from the bottom, why don't you say, Amod chatei, get up and sin on Shabbat by sprinkling the blood, b'shvil shetiskeh, right? So that you can then eat the meat after Shabbat. Meaning if you're allowed to do something inappropriate to salvage the karban, and we said about the same karban, you can do it, right? Ola and chatat was a problem, but why can't you do it for this? Answers the Gemara 8 lines from the bottom. Well, 7 lines. Amod chateh b'Shabbat b'Shabbat amrina. We would say you could sin on Shabbat for Shabbat, but here we're saying sprinkle the blood on Shabbat so that after Shabbat you can eat the meat, right? Because obviously you can't cook the meat on Shabbat. So how are you going to eat the karban? Now Tosas is bothered because I guess Tosas feels that sometimes you could eat meat raw, right? It wouldn't be the end of the world. You have for Shal Shudas, you had a little tartar maybe, but yeah, Tosa says it's not exactly appealing, so he doesn't think that's really a zchut. So amod chet b'Shabbat kadesh tiskeh b'chol lo amrinan. You wouldn't say do this on Shabbat so that you can eat the meat tonight when you can cook it, and therefore that's why you're not allowed to violate Shabbat in order to salvage the thing. Says the Gemara now 5 lines in the bottom, but is it really true? B'tarti mili lo amrina. If it's two different issues like Shabbat chol or chatat ola, you don't say go ahead and sin in order to salvage it. Vatnan, but there's a Mishnah. I was going to say a very famous Mishnah, but it's famous is always relative. But if you've ever learned Masechet Trumot, right? This Mishnah is a vexing Mishnah, I recall it, because the Mishnah talks about the following. You have a scenario where you have a barrel of wine that's truma. It could be anything, but let's say wine. And unfortunately, your barrel springs a leak, right? Fortunately for you, underneath this barrel, you have another barrel that's wide open. But the bottom barrel is chulin. Okay, now that's not a big problem because if your truma mixes with chulin, you just have to give it all to a kohen, right? The problem is that the chulin is tameh, right? Now that's no big deal. You can have chulin tameh. No, you don't have to eat chulin b'tahara. But if truma becomes tameh, then the truma has to be thrown away or burned, and the chulin will have to be thrown away, right? So you'll lose both barrels. So this top barrel of truma, which is tahar, is going to drip or roll down into the bottom barrel, or the bottom vat is really what it's talking about. That is chulin, that's tameh. So the Mishnah says, what are you going to do, right? What's your solution? So you have a great idea. You have a cup that you can catch all the wine in. The problem is that your cup is tameh, right? So can you go and make the truma tameh in order to save your chulin, right? Because remember, truma tameh has to be burned. Chulin tameh you can eat any day. So can you turn the truma tameh in order to save your chulin? Sounds like a perfect case, right? Says the Braita. Let's read the Mishnah now. Chavit shel truma shenishbira begat elyona. You've got a barrel of truma of wine that is broken in the upper vat. Ubetachtona chulin tmeim. And underneath it, it will roll down, if you don't stop it, into chulin that are tameh. So says the Mishnah, Mod Rebbe Eliezer Rebbe Yeshua. Now, again, we'll see what they argue about in a second. But Rebbe Eliezer and Yeshua agree, Shim yachol latzil mimenu revi'it b'tahara yatzil. If you can salvage even one revi'it of the truma b'tahara, you should let the rest of it get ruined in order to salvage that one revi'it. Let's say you got to run home and get another container, and by the time you get back, 95% of it's going to be poured out, but you can save a little bit, you should save a little bit. But let's say you can't, imlav. Let's say you have no chance to save any of the truma. So Rebbe Eliezer says, well, you can't do anything. You can't make it tameh b'yadayim. So turn the page to some mem chet amabet. Tered v'tit tameh. Let the wine or oil flow down and become tameh by rolling into the chulin tameh. V'al yitamenu biyad. You can't actively do that. It's passive. You have to let it happen. But Rebbe Yoshua says, af yitamenu biyad. Says Rebbe Yoshua, no problem. Because you can't salvage it anyways, make the upper truma tameh by putting a container in front of it, that's tameh, and save your chulin, right? So you see here that you're allowed to do an avera of making truma tameh in order to save your chulin, which are truma and chulin are different things. Answers the Gemara, well, that's a little different. Shani hatam, second line, dilatuma ka'azla. The difference there is that there's no way to change it, right? Meaning the wine's inevitably going to become tameh because it's going to roll downhill into the lower vat. So you're maybe accelerating that process by making it tameh earlier up in the trickle, but you're not actually changing what's going to happen. And that's where Rabbi Yeshua says, because it's going to happen inevitably, you can salvage your chulin by making the truma tameh with another container. So that's a different case. Okay, so anyways, you can see, we're actually about to turn on to the next topic, but you can see how this is a very complicated discussion about when you're allowed to actually do something inappropriate to save something else and make it useful. So we'll leave that there. Now, the third line, the Gemara continues to the next related topic, which
Yeah,
is
but how do we decide what is more important?
so right now, I would say our Gemara it's very difficult because our Gemara does not really talk about importance, right? So that didn't come again,
Right.
obviously not the whole discussion, right? These are complicated discussions, but I think here we talked about whether it's the same type, right? It was much more important to us whether it's an Ola and a Chatas than whether it's an important Ola or less important Ola. You know what I mean? Like, right? Obviously there it's a difference in what type of thing. And the concept basically seems to be that you can basically violate one thing if you're saving that same thing, right? Meaning you can do something wrong in a karban chatat or say kivsei atzeret because you're saving other kivsei atzeret, but we won't let you borrow and do something wrong to a karban chatat to save a karban olah, right? Which is not the same as more important or less important. Obviously, the I didn't go into some of the deeper questions, which is like, what's wrong with doing Zrika on Shabbos anyways, right? I mean, how big of an Isser is that, right? Is it really an Isser Malacha? Is it a Shvut? Is it, right? You can ask that question, right? It's a little complicated, so I tried to avoid it. But
Yeah.
anyways, but I would say in Trumot, this actually issue comes up a lot because this issue in Truma is really the issue, right? The wine's going to become Tameh regardless. Can you make it Tameh to save your other wine?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, let's continue now. We're at the third line of Daf Men Chet Amud Bet. Ki ata Rav Yitzchak. So now Rav Yitzchak came from Eretz Yisrael, right? Tana, and he's taught the following Braita, right? I mean, he taught, and it's not necessarily a Braita, but it was a teaching. Kivsei atzeret sheshachtan shalokim mitzvatan. Let's say you have your kivsei atzeret and you shech them the wrong way. Rashi again here has a couple of pshatim in what this means. The one that he likes is that you shechted shalol lishman. That's what it means, mitzvatan. He brings another pshat that means you did it in the wrong year. He doesn't like the pshat. He actually does explain it, but he doesn't like it. Okay, so let's go with the one he likes, which is that you shechted your kivsei atzeret shalol lishman. Instead of doing it for the community, for the tzibor, you did it for an individual. You did it for someone's birthday party. You did it for a karban of a nazir, let's say, whatever. So if you shechted kivsei atzeret shalol mitzvatan, they're psulin. They are puzzle. And now what happens with a puzzle? You don't burn it right away. To ubar tzuratam yatzula beit hasrefa. You should let it change its form, which always means stay overnight, become puzzle with lina, and then take it out the next morning and burn it. Okay? That's what Rav Yitzchak taught. Now, that seems a little strange because it's a karban shlamim. So we're going to have to see why that would be the case. Remember, usually a karban shlamim that you do shalol lishman is kosher. It just doesn't count for the owner, right? That's what it says according to Rav Yitzchak. Amar Rav Nachman said Rav Nachman to Rav Yitzchak, the reason for what you said is Mar demakishlu lechatat tani psulin. Because you have a hekesh between a karban chatat and the kivsei atzeret. You're treating the kivsei atzeret, which are shlamim, you're treating them like a karban chatat, and therefore you said it's possible because a karban chatat, of course, is done shalol lishman, you have to throw away. So you're treating the kivsei atzeret, although they're a karban shlamim, because the pasuk puts them next to each other. It says, Rashi quotes the pasuk. It says, "Vasitem sir izim echad lechatat u'shnei kvasim b'nei shana l'zevach shlamim." So it puts them together. So you treat your kivsei atzeret like the chatat. So that's how you learned it. But you should know that Tana Debe Levi, which is another Braita source, the Gamar Shalmei Chova Mishalmei Nidava, they compare the shlamim that are required, right, like the kivsei atzeret, which the Torah says you have to do, to the shlamim that you bring as a gift, as a nidava, and of shlamim that you bring as a nidava is not possible if you do it shalol lishma, it just doesn't count for the owner, and therefore they taught tnik sherim, they taught that it's actually kosher. So actually, the way you're teaching here is true if you compare the kivsei atzeret to a karban chatat, but if you compared it like Tan Debe Levi to a regular shlamim, it wouldn't be possible. Okay, it wouldn't count, right? You'd have to bring another one, but it would be kosher. Titani Levi. Now, where did Levi say that? So now he quotes Levi. Levi taught, and this is again the context here is about Nazir. So Nazir brings different karbanot, but says Levi, Shar Shalmein Nazir, other shlamim of a Nazir, meaning outside of the ones that are brought in a very specific context. Sheshachtan shaloki mitzvatan. If you shech them the wrong way, meaning let's again say according to Rashi, shalol lishman, right? So you take the shlamim of a Nazir. Remember, a Nazir, let's say, it becomes tamei. They have to bring a karban. If a Nazir at the end of their Nazir would bring a karban, let's say you take the karban of a Nazir and you do it for the wrong person. Says Levi, nechalin liyom v'layla. You eat it for 1 day and 1 night. Now that's not a lot, right? Because usually a shlamim is eaten for 2 days and 1 night, but an ayal of a nazir is eaten for 1 day and 1 night. So you treat it with the stricter part of a nazir. The ain tunin lo lechem v'lo zera. But you don't treat it like a carbon of a nazir otherwise, because it doesn't count for the nazir, right? Because you did it shalol lishman. So you don't have to take bread with it like you would with an ayal of a nazir. And you don't have to give the zeroah like you would with a nazir. So that is the machloket basically between between Rav Yitzchak and Tana Debe Levi. Whether you treat the shlamim of atzeret, the shnei kivsei atzeret, like a chatas, so that if it's done shalol lishman, it's pasul, or you treat it like every other shlamim that if you do it shalol lishman is kosher, just not alula ba'alim l'shem chova. So that's the statement. Meitve. Now we have a problem from the following brayta. There is a brayta, this is a Tosefta in Zvachim. So the Tosefta says the following. Asham, right? Let's say you have an Asham that is supposed to be Ben Shana, okay? Now remember, the landscape here is a keves, right, is considered to be an animal, a sheep, that is a lamb maybe, in its first year of life. An ayal, right, is an older lamb. I don't know if we still call it a lamb, a sheep, that's in its second year of life, right? Or second year and beyond. So sometimes the Torah says you bring a keves ben shnato, sometimes the Torah says bring an ayal, right? Different karbanot, depending on what you're doing, the Torah specifies which one to bring. So says the Braita, if you have an asham, right, that is ben shana, an asham that's supposed to be done in an animal that's 1 year old, vehevi ben shtayim, but instead you bring an older animal, or you have an asham that's ben shtayim. It's supposed to be an ayos, a 2-year-old animal, vehevi ben shana, and you bring a 1-year-old ayal. Says the Braita, psulin. That carbon is pasul because you brought the wrong carbon. V'tu'ubar tziratan, you should let it sit overnight and change its shape. V'yatzu lebeit asrifa, and it should go out to be burned. And that's true about an asham. We'll see why in a second. Aval, olat nazir, v'olat yoledet, v'olat mitzora. Right? All of these people, a nazir, a yoledet, a mitzora, are all supposed to bring a keves for an olah. And it's supposed to be, I guess, an ayal. Shahayu b'nei shtei shanim, right? They're supposed to bring something. Sorry, let me get Rashi. They're supposed to bring a 1-year-old, right? It's supposed to be a keves. So all of these people, a nazir, a mitzvah, and a yoleda, are supposed to bring a 1-year-old ola, but instead they brought ben shtei shanim, right? They brought a 2-year-old ola, v'shachtan, and they shechted it. Says the Braita ksherim. That is kosher. It's not a problem because an ola that's done basically of the wrong year is going to be okay. Now, what's the rule? Klalo shel davar, this is all the Braita. Says the Braita, kol ha-kasher ba'olat nidava, kasher ba'olat chova. Anything that you could have brought an olat nidava this age, since you can bring an olat nidava as a 2-year-old, you can bring an olat chova even if the Torah said bring it as a 1-year-old. If you bring a 2-year-old animal, it's kosher. And Kol ha-pasul b'chatat, pasul ba'asham. Anything that's pasul by a karban chatat, meaning if you bring the wrong age chatat, it would be pasul. So too, if you bring the wrong age asham, it's pasul. Chutz mi shalol lishmo, right? Except for shalol lishmo. So what this Braita is very clearly saying is that any time that the nidava animal is kosher, the chova animal is kosher. Now, of course, we just said by shalmei atzeret, right, the shnei kivsei atzeret, which are a chova, they're a requirement, that there's a machloket. Do you treat it like nidava, in which case shalol lishma would be okay, or do you treat it like a chatat, in which case shalol lishma would not be okay? But this Braita seems to say that you compare the chova to the nidava, right? So answers the Gemara, you're right, because this Tana is Tana Debei Levi. That's exactly what Levi said, right? Tana Debei Levi said that you compare the shlamim of Atzeret to a regular shlamim and it would be kosher, shalol lishma. But obviously Rabbi Yitzchak would say, I have a different opinion, or there's another Tana who disagrees. So this Braita, although talking about ages of an animal, is the same principle as shalol lishma. Now, let's see this further. Tashma, come and learn more about this statement of Levi. The Tani Levi, what did Levi say? And this is the statement of Levi. Says Levi, again, Levi is sometimes treated like a Tana, or he quotes a Tana. What Levi taught the following: Asham Nazir v'Asham Mitzora sheshachtan shalol lishman. Right? Let's say you take the Asham of a Nazir Again, there's a lot of different carbon we're talking about. So we're talking about the Ola of a Nazir. That's different. But the Asham of a Nazir or the Asham of a Mitzora, that is Shachtan Shalol Lishman, right? The Nazir gives it to the Kohen shechs it, but does it for the wrong person, or the Mitzora does it for the wrong person. Says Levi, and from a Braita, Ksherim. Those are kosher carbonot, meaning you do zrika, you can eat it like every asham, but lo alu lebalim l'shem chova. But you can't bring it it doesn't count for the owner. He's got to bring another one, right? Because like most carbonot that are done shalol shman, they don't count for the owner. Continues Levi, shachdan mechusar zman biba'alim. Let's say you shecht it when the owner is not ready for it to be shechted yet, right? Remember, an asham of a nazir you bring after you become tameh, you have to have 7 days of tahara. Let's say you bring it 4 days in. Or in Mitzvah, the same thing. You have to have 7 days of tahara. You bring it too early, right? Oh, and this is where the question comes from. Oh, shahayu b'nei shtei shanim mushachtan. Or let's say instead of bringing an asham of a mitzora or an asham of a nazir as a 1-year-old keves, which is what it's supposed to be, you bring a 2-year-old. You bring an ayil. So then says Levi, psulin. The whole thing, the carbon is puzzle because the owner's not ready for it or the animal's not the right animal. Ask the Gemara, but why is it puzzle? Bimita, if it's true that you are supposed to derive what nidava from chova, meaning if something equivalent to this is okay when you volunteer it, then it would be okay, at least not count for the owner, it would be okay when it's a chova, imita ligmar mishlamim. Why can't you say that since a shlamim can be brought as a 2-year-old, right? Because a shlamim can be brought as an ayil or a keves. So why don't you learn out that this asham, which is a required asham, is going to be kosher even if it's 2 years old, just the same way you said that you learn out chova from nidava. And answer the Gemara, obvious answer, that because shlamim mishlamim gamar, right? Levi would say that you can learn a 2-year-old shlamim of kivsei atzeret from a shlamim of a nidava, but this is an asham. An asham mishlamim lo gamar. We don't necessarily learn out an asham from a shlamim. And so because the fact that a shlamim can be brought as a 2-year-old does not tell you that an asham can be brought as a 2-year-old. Says, okay, but why don't you learn out an asham from another asham, right? The gamar shlamim mishlamim, but says the Gemara, if Levi learns one shlamim of atzeret, which is a chova, from a shlamim of nidava, ligmar nami asham me asham. Why can't he learn out one asham from another asham? Now, the 2 ashamot that I just quoted, asham nazir and asham mitzora, the Torah says you're supposed to do it as a 1-year-old asham. But there are many other ashamot, not many, but several other ashamot that are done as an ayil, as a 2-year-old, right? So, for example, says Gemara, asham nazir, asham mitzora, which are supposed to be 1 year old, you can learn those from asham gzelot or asham mi'ilot, right? Which are done, the Torah says, as a 2-year-old. So the fact that a 2-year-old animal can be an asham in gzelot and mi'ilot, it should tell you that even though you did your asham mitzora and asham nazir incorrectly, it still counts, even though it doesn't count for you. Again, no one's disputing that, but it still counts as a karban, and you don't have to destroy it. You can eat it, and you can finish the avodah. Or the opposite way. So, asham gzilot v'asham milot. Let's say you come with your asham gzilot and asham milot, which are supposed to be 2-year-old animals. Let's say you bring a 1-year-old animal. Why would that be puzzle? Why don't you learn it out? Me asham nazir v'asham mitzora. Why don't you say, well, there's another asham that can be done as a 1-year-old? So it exists the same way Levi said that the kivsei atzeret, which are supposed to be 1-year-old, can be kosher if they're 2-year-old because you can volunteer a shlamim that's 2-year-old. Why don't you learn out that an asham mi'ilot, for example, that's supposed to be 2 years old, if you bring it as a 1-year-old, it'll be okay because an asham nazir can be done as a 1-year-old. So why don't you learn one out from the other? And again, the Gemara gives Rav Shimi bar Ashi gives what I think is the obvious answer, though of course I learned it already, so maybe it's obvious to me. Amar Rav Shimi bar Ashi, there's a big difference because by asham, the Torah says, do it as a 1-year-old if it's a nazir or mitzora, or do it as a 2-year-old if it's mi'ilot or gzelot. But it doesn't give you the option of doing either one, right? So one is right and one is wrong. And you can't learn out a correct action from an incorrect action, as opposed to the shlamim, where when you volunteer a shlamim, you can bring any age you want. It could be 1 or 2, right? So it says Rav Shimi bar Ashi, I'll read that inside. Danin davar shelo behechshero and davar shelo behechshero. You can learn something that's done in the wrong setting, meaning in this setting where it doesn't work, from another setting where it's not supposed to work. But and the example, just to be clear, is that if you shecht a shlamim shelo lishman, right, it's not going to count for its owner, but it's going to be a kosher animal. But ein danin davar shelo behechshero midavar behechshero. But you can't say, oh, look, this Asham Nazir is supposed to be a 1-year-old animal. If you bring it as a 2-year-old, it should count because there's a different Asham of Gzelot or Me'ilot that's done as a 2-year-old. Because the Asham Gzelot and Me'ilot that's done as a 2-year-old is done correctly. So you can't learn out an incorrect act from a correct act and say, well, if the correct act is kosher, the incorrect act should be kosher also. And therefore, there's no comparison to compare one asham to the other asham because you can't learn that something is kosher from another setting where it is supposed to be done in that way. That's the answer of Simon Bar Ashi. Ask the Gemara, now 2 lines on the bottom, is that velo? I know this is complicated, but hopefully it's clear enough. Velo, is it true? But Tanya, but one last case for today, which is the case that we've quoted many times before, which is minayin liyotzei. How do you know, we said many times, that if you have a karban, remember, a karban is supposed to stay within the confines of the Beit HaMikdash. How do you know that if you take it, remember, if you take it outside the Beit HaMikdash, it becomes pasul with the yotzei? What if you take it outside, you like, oh my God, I made a big mistake. You bring it right back in, you go up to the Mizbeach and you put it on the Mizbeach. And someone says, what happened to that piece you took outside? And you say, well, I put it on the Mizbeach. So we've said many times, minayin liyotzei, shim Allah lo yered, that if you put it on the Mizbeach, you don't take it off. You're not supposed to put it up. But once you put it up, you leave it up. How do we know that? So again, this is, you did something incorrect, right? You took an animal, a karban that left the Beit HaMikdash, and you put it on the Mizbeach incorrectly. How do you know, says the Gemara, the Braita, that if you put it on the Mizbeach, you don't take it off? Sharei yotzei kasher b'bama. Because look, if you have a bama in your backyard in Ashkelon, right, and you put a karban, that's yotzei, you're outside the Beit HaMikdash, and that's the way you're supposed to do it. So since you could put it on a bama, after the fact, if you put it on the Mizbeach, it could stay on the Mizbeach. But this contradicts exactly what you just said, because you're saying, how do you know a karban that's done incorrectly can stay on the Mizbeach? Because in a bama, that's the way you do it correctly, right? So you just told me that from an asham, you can't learn out a 2-year-old that is kosher by in the wrong sense from one word to in the right sense. You're doing the exact same thing with yotzei. And answers the Gemara on the top of Memtet Amud Aleph, as we've had many times before, that the truth is that this Braita is not accurate. We really don't learn that yotzei is kosher if it's put on the Mizbeach from a bama. Because the Tana, in fact, azot Torat Ola riba samachle. He really relies on the pasuk that says zot Torat Ola, which is at the end of the parsha, and it basically sounds like every Ola counts, right? Meaning, even if you did it incorrectly, but you put it on the Mizbeach, you can leave it up there. So the source for this is really not comparing it to a bama. It's just that the Braita wanted to say bama as an asmachta, as Rashi puts it. But the truth is that you can't learn this halacha from the bama. And therefore, it's true, according to at least Rishimi Bar Ashi, that we won't learn something that's done incorrectly from something that's done correctly. And that's why an asham that's supposed to be a 1-year asham, like an asham nazir or an asham mitzora, that's done with a 2-year-old animal, an ayol, will not become kosher, even though there's another asham that can be done as a 2-year-old. And so that's where we will leave this at the top line of Memtet Amud Aleph.
I thought
Yes.
that actually when the Bet HaMikdash is up, that we are not allowed to actually bring any kind of korbanot on a bama.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
What we're saying is that what the way we understood the right is that because before there was a Beit HaMikdash, right, when there was Shabbat or Bamot, you could take an animal in Ashkelon, I just pick that example, and put it in your backyard, which is clearly a yotzei. So because in that context, yotzei is okay, even once there is a Beit HaMikdash where yotzei is clearly not okay, right? And everyone will tell you, if you took your animal outside the Beit HaMikdash, you're not supposed to put it on the Mizbeach. But if you did, b'diavad, you're allowed to leave it on the Mizbeach.
Okay.
So the Braita makes it sound like we're learning that from yotzei, but it turns out, and we've said this several times before, that in fact the Braita is misleading. The Braita is just giving you an asmachta, that it's a lesson, but the reality is we're learning it from the pasuk of Zot Torah Ola.
Okay, thank you.
So we will stop here. God willing, we'll pick it up tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. from the top line of Daf Memtet Amud Aleph. Hope to see everyone there.
Thank you, Eli.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Shavua tov. Shavua tov.
Shavua tov.